Welcome back to HopePod. It's great to see you once again in our second episode, our second week of having a conversation about three things. Lament. What are we really lamenting as to what's happened during COVID-19? What are we thankful for? What are the things that have been gained during this time? And thirdly, where's Jesus? Where's the hope? What mission opportunities have come our way? Now, this is a conversation. It's relaxed. We're not here as experts. We're here to explore the challenges, create some thoughts about the future, and hopefully you'll get involved as well. There is an email address. You can email any questions or thoughts you've got. You can also comment on the YouTube comment section. Jim, what's the email address?
I should be asking you. It is hopepodlanks@gmail.com.
Thank you. So do email in any thoughts or questions you've got. Now, Jim's here, and Claire and myself, we introduced ourselves last week, and we've got a special guest today. This is David O'Brien. Hello, David. Thanks so much for coming.
Pleasure.
Tell us about yourself, what you do, where you are.
Well, David O'Brien, as you just said, I'm at St Thomas's, which is in central Blackpool. In many ways, I originate from the Manchester area, and it reminds me of Manchester-on-Sea, really, because it's terraced houses, very working class area, which is, similar to where I was brought up in. Some wonderful people in the parish, but there's a lot of social need and a lot of issues to do with deprivation, and it's sometimes a tough area to be. So for various reasons, it's not unusual to hear sirens going past at various times of day. So there's a lot of dysfunction, a lot of social problems, but actually, in a strange kind of way, it's a great place to be. And we're probably about a 10-minute walk from Blackpool Tower, but it's totally different from the Blackpool you see in the promenade, where we live. So that's where I am. And I've been there for just over 2 years.
Brilliant.
But it's my second time there, as you know.
As I know, yeah.
Because it used to be the church I attended many years ago, and I've returned to the church I used to attend to be the vicar.
Yeah. So. And it's got a special place in my heart because I grew up there as a teenager, and it really brought my faith to life. So it's really good to have you here. So our title today of the episode is Back to the Future, thinking about how do we reassure returning worshippers? Because as we come out of a pandemic, there's a sense in which some people will lack confidence to come back. So to begin with, let's think about the lament aspect of what we're looking at today. Are there things that you lament about the pandemic in terms of your parish and your church community?
Yeah, there are, and it's a funny one because, of course, we need to be respectful as Christians, and one of the things that we've had to do to be respectful is, we keep social distance, we wore masks, we closed our buildings, and we did all the proper things to show that we were caring towards the society. But if I'm honest, that also frustrated me because I like history, and if we go back in history, even in this country and in Europe, there was the Black Death, and it killed at least a quarter of the population of Europe. It was a pandemic in many ways, but the church has stayed open. And then there was the plague, the Great Plague in 1665 in London, which killed large sections of the population there. The church has stayed open. Now, I'm not saying we should have done that, but one of the first things I did when I, like lots of people, went online with my phone thinking what we're doing, and I started to broadcast, I turned to the Book of Common Prayer, 1662. And in the Book of Common Prayer, there's a prayer for deliverance from plague and pestilence. But there's also a prayer of thanksgiving for deliverance from plague and pestilence. And that told me that the Christian church has lived through times of plague and pestilence before and retained its worship. So I found it frustrating that, okay, if we couldn't have acts of public worship because of social distance, I found it hard that we couldn't even open the church door for people to come in to pray. Yeah. Because there's a great tradition in this nation, despite what people think of people being disconnected from the church, of people at times of hardship wanting to pray. And our churches were closed. I found that really hard. Yeah. And that was part of my lament. Yeah. Because what did Jesus do when people were ill? He touched the lepers and he went to those who were sick. Now, I know there's all kinds of medical reasons and scientific reasons why we didn't do that, but I found that a challenge, actually, not to be with the people when they needed us the most.
Yeah, that's really helpful. We were talking last week in last week's episode about missing singing, you were saying, Claire, but actually what you're saying is just physically turning up at the building was the biggest challenge, wasn't it?
Yeah,
during that pandemic.
And pastorally, you know,
Yeah.
what are the things that we do as Christians? I'm not just talking about vicars. If there's somebody sick, you know, and they're in the hospital, that it's always been, let's go and see them and pray with them and reassure them and encourage their faith. And we couldn't even visit the hospitals. And people were dying without that, if sacramental ministry, if you want to call it that, you know, without the ability with somebody to pray with them. And, you know, the medical staff did a fantastic job, you know, and they were there with people, and we understand why people were in wards and they were in isolation, and we understand why that was. But I remember one situation, and this is not uncommon, where somebody was telling me that their last conversation with their loved one, a funeral that was preparing to do, their last conversation with them was on a tablet. Yeah. And they watched their loved one die on a screen, and they weren't with them. And that's really difficult.
I think the other thing is that as Christians, there's a hope, isn't there? There's a future beyond this life, and sometimes, like, especially with social media, and you see people responding to the pandemic in all sorts of variety of ways. But as a Christian nation, as a Christian church, then actually there's a hope and a big view that we can bring to situations that isn't just in this moment, and that's not just in pandemic, it's in everything, isn't it? And sometimes when you can't see anything, you can't see the wood for the trees type thing, you come to God, and hopefully as a church we are able to say, you know, God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and knows what's going on. And when you're not able to do that because you can't have people coming to church, it's one of the hardest things, isn't it?
And our very faith is based on the miraculous, that we say Jesus is being raised from the dead. So we believe he is the resurrection and the life, and he's there for everything. And one of the privileges I've had over the years of taking funerals is that I can guarantee, no pun intended, but it's like Blackpool Rock. As soon as I say Our Father, the congregation are joining in, even if they haven't been in church for years, and they take comfort from what we would call liturgy, the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalm. They're there with you. And at the point of death, we weren't able to be with people. Now, and even the hospital chaplains were able to do that, but in a limited capacity. And the whole thing, you know, you want to be with there for those key moments in life. You know, from the cradle to the grave.
Yeah, that's literally really helpful. So you really are lamenting what you've, and I'm with you. It's been so hard to have missed that opportunity to be a pastor to people at their deepest point of need. Are there things, however, you look back and think, actually, despite all that bad stuff, I'm thankful for this aspect of new opportunity or pastoral care or church life? Can you think of anything along those sorts of lines?
I'm reminded of, it's a true story, but it sounds like a joke, but it's a true story. And somebody was telling me, it was a Pentecostal minister who was in Scotland, and the elders in that church didn't want any change, which is ironic for a Pentecostal church. No, we've always done it this way. You think, oh, okay. And he wanted to move a piece of furniture because it was in the way of what he wanted to do. And they said, oh, you're not moving that. It's always been in this church. He thought, I need to move it. So what he did, he moved it 2 inches a week, and nobody noticed. And by the end of a long time period, it had moved from over there to there. And what really, the technical term, it does my head in, to be perfectly honest. I come from a non-Christian background. I was a convert when I was about 22. I used to be a skinhead, I still am actually, you know, into punk and wearing Doc Martin boots and all the rest of it. And for me, all that mattered was, is Jesus real or not? And having that encounter with the Holy Spirit. And everything else is just stuff. And I don't say that in a disrespectful way, but the things we worry about in church is like, that piece of furniture has always been there, and Gladys has always done the flowers, and all this business. We've been forced to stop and to reflect on what's really important and necessary for being a Christian. And actually, when we break it down, the essentials are, is Jesus real? Do we believe in him? Do we have a relationship with him? And what is my responsibility in following him? Really, those are the essentials of the Christian faith. Everything else is just stuff. And so people from every walk of life in the church tradition, those who you would call charismatic, who maybe don't care about any tradition whatsoever, it's just let's meet God now, you know, and we're in the moment, to those who would worry that the vase has always been over there and now it's over there and I can't cope with it. Everybody's had to stop. And I believe it's been an opportunity to say, let's now focus on what's important. What are the essentials of life and death? And I think that's been a great opportunity, because even the most unchurched person, if I can use that kind of language, has had to think those basic questions that every one of us is facing at some point in our life. What am I doing in this world? What's my purpose? And where am I going? Everybody has to face those questions. And one of the things to celebrate, I think, like everybody else, you know, trying to live stream on Facebook, thinking, am I on? Oh, I'm on, you know, and all this business, and feeling really awkward.
That's how we've started every Zoom meeting, isn't it? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
You're on mute.
Are you there, Fred? You know, I'm here, I can hear you. No, you think, is anybody watching this? And actually, somebody was watching it, because there were loads of people logging into Facebook who we didn't know, who weren't regular church members, and they kept watching. Even though it was like they could almost see the strings attached to us like puppies, people were watching because they wanted answers to those questions, which everybody's asking.
That's really helpful. So actually, what you've said is, as a pastor, as a priest, you miss that personal contact with the congregation in their deepest need. But you're thankful that actually the pandemic has caused everything else to be stripped away and the focus be entirely on Jesus. Yeah. And it's almost like pressing the reset button, isn't it?
It is.
And from what you've described then, there's been opportunities. Yeah. So tell us more about the engagement on Facebook. Do you do morning prayer and things like that?
And in fact, what we've done, and for me, I think it's been a real blessing, not the pandemic, but the lessons that have been learned from the pandemic, because I'm a bit of a technophobe. You know, I'm all for technology, but I'm not very good at using it. You know, so I will use social media, but I'm a bit clunky doing it, thinking, oh, I am on. You know, but coming through it, we've been left with a mixed mode that now we're worshipping back in person. We're still on Facebook 4 times a week as a church. So I'm doing prayers on Tuesday morning. Emma, who's my colleague at the church, is doing Thursday morning, and then we have somebody called Vicky, who you know, is doing evening prayer on a Monday, and Nick Hall, who you probably also know, is doing evening prayer on a Friday. So 4 times a week we're online.
That's great.
And people are still watching and engaging with that.
Yeah.
But the good thing about that actually is, beyond the pandemic, although we're not beyond it, but sort of emerging into this new world, as it were, that there are people who would struggle to get to church who were still engaging online. So we're in people's homes without having to be physically there. So it's almost ironic. You want to be physically there, but the fact we can do things on social media means that we don't always have to be physically there for people. So it's a bit of a mixed mode.
So actually, you are reassuring worshippers. In a sense, you're saying the reassurance is, if you don't feel confident to come back in person yet, don't worry. Yeah. We're doing stuff online, and you can take part from home if that's what's right for you. But you've also got more normal services in person. And are you seeing people starting to come back? And if so, how are they feeling reassured? How are you giving them confidence to come back?
I mean, for me, one of the basic principles of the Christian faith is in 1 Corinthians, where Paul's actually talking about idol worship and meat that's been sacrificed in the idol temples, because in those days, if you wanted to get meat, you went to the temple. That's where you bought your meat from. And some Christians were thinking, I can't do that, it's been sacrificed to an idol. Other Christians were saying, oh, it's just meat, give thanks to God. And Paul's principle is, if I do something that offends somebody else, don't do it. Think about the other person's conscience and their well-being. And that's been my approach, even though you could argue I don't need to. So with communion now, so we're not wearing masks in the church at the moment, but we were at first. I was wearing the mask, even though, I thought this is not ideal, but I would wear the mask to reassure other people. When it came to consecrating the bread and the wine, I would make sure before I handled anything, I'd be wearing surgical gloves. I felt a bit like a surgeon, put your gloves on, cubicle 1, to celebrate communion for the sake of the other person's well-being, psychologically and physically. And so even now, I'm not wearing a mask to lead worship and generally in the church, but I still do it when I consecrate the bread and the wine. I still put my mask on and I still put the glove on to reassure people. And even though we're back together, we're basically round tables. There's still a bit of distance. But the approach is, I've said to people, if it helps you and you want to continue wearing your mask, continue wearing it if that makes you feel safer. So it's just reinforcing those messages. And then pastorally, one of the lovely things that came out of a pastoral approach was, I said, look, not everybody's going to be online. We've got some people who are of a generation that they're never going to look at the phone for public worship. We can't go to see them, what we're going to do. And so we divided the electoral roll up between a team of about 10 people to make sure everybody on the electoral roll got a phone call at least once a week from somebody in the church. And that's continued with the ones who haven't come back.
Yeah.
So everybody gets a phone call every week to say, how are you doing? Sometimes I do it, often it's a pastoral team. So we got that approach as we're coming out to reassure people to say, okay, we know you can't come, but you're still a member of the congregation.
Yeah, that's a great model, isn't it? I really like that. To think that actually the way you're reassuring people is showing love.
Yeah.
A phone call, reassurance that actually you're doing things safely by wearing a mask or wearing gloves and loving the person who has those concerns. Have you found similar experiences where you are, Claire?
Yeah, I have. And actually, I think just listening there, David, to you as well is, I think the clunkiness that you described of, or am I on, when we're doing things online or whatever. And, we had at one point, I was doing communion and I had to put hand sanitizer on and then try and get the rubber gloves on top of the hand sanitizer. And it does sound like I'm getting ready for surgery, just totally awkward, really unfamiliar, and it can leave us feeling a bit like, oh, this isn't very professional, or it's not very slick, or I'm totally distracting people from their worship. But actually, I wonder if that's part of the reassuring of people, because it kind of says, we're all human here and we're all trying to work out what do we do here, and so it's okay. There's like a reassurance of it's okay that this isn't slick and perfect, and just like you're feeling like you don't really know what you're doing, don't worry. I'm with you.
Well,
we're all working this out.
Welcome to the world of ministry. We often feel like that anyway without social media. But I think one of the lovely things is, so it takes you a few more minutes to prepare the communion table, I'll put it that way, because you're putting the gloves on and sanitising. And what I've found is that people just sit there quietly, and there's a real sense of reverence, if you like, to say something special's happening. Nobody's complained, and nobody's complained that, oh, we've never done it like this. People have been accepting to say, actually, we're here together to worship God. So it's taken, not completely, but it's taken some of the concern about the stuff away. And that we've been able to slow down, which has not been a bad thing, actually. That we don't have to be like headless chickens to function in ministry.
I think one of the other interesting things listening to you is that we've for years in different churches that we've been part of, the conversation can always be, how do we make sure that church isn't just a Sunday thing and isn't just, you come, you recharge your batteries, get everything right with God, and then you go out and forget about it for the rest of the week. Yeah. And I think, I've listened to what you're saying about doing prayer on Facebook regularly and different churches doing different things through the week. Actually, that conversation that we've had where it's like, how do we encourage people to be church where they are? Then actually, what's happened naturally is, well, how do we communicate with people online has become part of the conversation, hasn't it? And,
yeah, absolutely.
And to be able to encourage people to come back into the building, you don't want to go backwards to a point where you're like, right, you're all back now. Sunday's the day that's important and the rest of the week's not so. Actually, if it's this sort of hybrid dynamic, you still have that ability to encourage people where they are, because they've been so used to it for 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's really helpful. I think one of the things that I found hard is practically, you mentioned about hand sanitizer a few times in clubs, you know, is I do this every week without fail. I do my hands, okay, do a whole kind of routine, you know, okay, and then I touch my microphone to turn it off. And I think, oh no, I'm going to do it again now.
Yeah.
Oh, because, you know, if it's been warm, you know, we've not had a bad summer, have we? And then I can feel my glasses sliding down my nose.
You push him up.
I thought, I've got to push them up, because if I don't, and I've got the mask on, I steam up, and I can't see what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And if I take them off, you know, I've got to have a clue what I'm doing.
So you know you've got like 20 or 40 or 60 people all watching you. Everyone's watching you like, what's he just touched now? He's about to touch my piece of bread or wafer.
Well, I think they're less worried than we are. So I've learnt techniques. So rather than touch my glasses with my fingers, I'll use my knuckle like that and do it, you know, and stuff like that. Or
again,
use
that
my sleeve.
reassures someone, doesn't it? Because it shows the person in the congregation who's still alert to COVID that actually you've not just taken your normal finger and pushed him up, you're being careful. So it's really good to hear these things, and really good to hear about the opportunities. You mentioned about sitting around tables. So is that a new thing? Is that something that's come out of the pandemic?
Yeah, Emma, my colleague, was, and I mean, there's lots of things which are not just rebooted but started, and I was very keen that what we needed to do as a leadership is meet on a Monday morning, so we reflect on the Sunday and what we've done. So every Monday we have a leadership meeting where we pray together, and actually we're just honest about how did that go? Was that pants, you know, or what's worked and what hasn't? And she came up with this idea of intergenerational worship, you know, which is quite a sentence, but basically we're all worshipping together. And the way we did that was the activities are on the tables, there's colouring, there's word searches, all kinds of things. And we sit in groups of 6. And part of it was just to break the mould. And I said, look, you know, the mission of the church is still the same. You know, the Great Commission is that we need to share this good news of Jesus with everybody. We're not here just for ourselves. And I said, let's face it. I mean, I reminded them what the Archdeacon said a while ago. He said, look, if you're going to do things differently, now's your opportunity. So I thought, yeah, fair enough. And I said, look, we've been forced to do things differently for about 15 months anyway. You know, so let's just try. I said, it's an experiment, it's a service pilot. And I said, and we're hoping that we want to reach the local people who are not yet joining us for worship. And we've done that. And every week we've had visitors. They haven't all come at once. If they did, we'd have a problem. But we've been seeing people coming in. And for me, I'll say this carefully, one of the beautiful things I saw was that there was somebody who wasn't very well a couple of weeks ago in church. And they were feeling physically sick, so somebody got them a bucket, and in the middle of the gathering they're being sick, and you know, nobody bothered. People were just caring and looking after this person, you know, and you think, I would hope that we're a much more accepting and loving community than we were before. And part of that is the new worship style, and we are seeing people come in who know absolutely nothing about the Christian faith, who just say, I want to know more. And some of those people are just walking in, and some of those people are coming because they've heard it's different. But I reckon, looking at the congregation yesterday, about a quarter of that congregation are people that we didn't have before.
Fantastic. That's great.
There's been some grumbling, and there always will be, because we've never done it like this before. But that's what the children of Israel said when they stood before the Red Sea and the waters parted, and Moses said, go through. And they said, we've never done it like this before. well, you can walk through or you can die because Pharaoh's after us, you know. But it's that kind of thing where there will always be irritation. But I see it, not quite a tongue-in-cheek, and I think to myself, but don't you realise we've been doing things differently for over a year anyway?
And like you said before as well, it's taken us back to basics of what are we here for? What is the church? Why is Jesus good news? How do we, as the people of Jesus, as Christ's body, you know, the church, how do we bring hope? If Jesus is a message and a bringer of hope, then how do we bring the hope of Jesus to people, don't we?
Absolutely.
And I think having that front and centre again, for us as a worshipping congregation, like you said, you know, we've kind of had to cut back on all the stuff that we do, that we can just get busy doing, and refocus on Jesus, how are you hoping this situation that feels really hopeless? How am I going to hold on to you through this season of challenge and heartache and change? And, you know, as we're kind of coming out the other side, we hope, but it is into a world, I think, that's changed. But Jesus is still hope, isn't he? And it's about finding new language, new ways to speak about that. But I think that you're right, that we speak about it with a bigger or a deeper honesty, because we've discovered it for ourselves in a fresh way as the church.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that frustrates me is that sometimes when we talk about mission as a church historically, we talk about components. You know, is this and this, and actually the mission is a person.
Yeah.
And he's either alive or he isn't. And if Jesus is alive, he's the mission. And it's about introducing him to people. And again, everything else, they're the servant, not the master. He's the master. And the different techniques are the servants. And it's just remembering, actually, without being corny about this, it's all about Jesus. And I would hope that coming out of the pandemic, you know, look, it's always been a broken world since the fall. So it's still a broken world. And the solution to the broken world is still the same. It's the person Jesus Christ, and he's the hope that is before us, and that is our message. You know, from birth to death, he's got the answer because he is the answer.
That is a great place to draw to a conclusion. I think Jesus is the only hope and the only answer. And the way that you've described to us today of how you've reassured worshippers to return online, to keep online or return in person, is actually your focus. The focus of your ministry of the church is entirely on Jesus, stripping away the things that we don't need necessarily, changing the culture, shaping it to make sure it's a welcoming culture. That, as you said, if somebody's poorly in the service, everyone gathers around and cares, and keeping in touch with each other through the week. So it's about love and care and compassion, but all through the lens of Jesus, isn't it? So that's a great place to stop, I think. And let's you mentioned before as well, in one of your services about, well, in all your services about that silence, that in the past would have been uncomfortable, but actually now it's become more common and therefore more comfortable. I wonder now if it might be a good time to just be quiet, you know, and for us as a group here and those watching at home or listening at home, let's be quiet and be still and consider what we've been talking about. And I'll just lead us with a couple of things to think through. Just be thinking through about those people perhaps who haven't yet returned to worship, and just hold them in mind right now in terms of holding them in prayer. And just say to God, God, please be with them. Please give them that reassurance that he loves them, he's with them, he understands their concerns. Perhaps if we just think of those people now. Perhaps as we think about lamenting, we think about those people that are no longer part of our congregations, no longer part of our midweek groups. And we think of their families and friends and we pray for them, praying that God will really heal them in their deep grief and will journey with them. Let's give thanks for the things that God has done as a result of the pandemic. We'd never have asked God to do this, but maybe good things have come forward through the changes that have taken place. And just, again, in the silence, give thanks to God for any things that have been mentioned today or in your ministry, in your life, in your faith, that you think, actually, yeah, I'm really thankful for that. And then finally, we heard from David at the end there that Jesus is the centre. He's the hope, he's the reason, he's the hope of the world and the hope of the church, and he's the only hope. So let's just now consider Jesus, centre of our life, centre of our faith, the one whom we follow, in whom we trust, the one in whom has granted us salvation. And perhaps just bring to mind now those people in our networks, in our phone contact book, our Facebook friends, our neighbours, our friends, our family, those on the fringe of church life. Let's pray that God will show them the person of Jesus, that he'll bring them into friendship with himself, that they'll experience abundant life and eternal life. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this HopePod. We'll see you again next week with another guest. Thanks and God bless. Bye-bye.